Okay, everyone, we'll get started, I guess. There might be a couple more people that file in, but we only have an hour, so I should just get started. So my name's Shkooye Tim Hall. I'm from Teslin, from the Yukon, and been working on Tlingit language and teaching it for a few years now. This is like my third or fourth time to Sitka, so it's always cool to come back here. Yeah, and so today's presentation is on using audio to help with language learning. And there's lots of audio recorded out there on Tlingit, but today's presentation is on some ways that you can change it and structure it to kind of help either yourself as a learner, or if you're working with students, to help them learn. So we'll I'll tell you a little bit about how I learned about it, and then we'll just go through some different options of different ways you can structure it, because there's all sorts of ways that you can structure audio to be on a schedule that can help your learners depending on where they're at. So there's lots of challenges in language education. I started in late 2014, and so it's been about 10 years working at it. And there's all kinds of challenges that we face. But one of the biggest and most obvious challenges with learning a language like Tlingit is there's so few fluent speakers that you can converse with. There's not very many left. Probably the biggest reason I think that language learners struggle with learning Tlingit is we just don't hear it enough on like a minute-to-minute, hour-to-hour basis every day. Even if you're signed up in a regular class, it might only be like an hour or two every day that you're actually listening to the language. And there's tons of resources out there on Tlingit, but most of it's all written, whether it's in books or on the internet. And learners spend very little time actually listening to the language. And often if learners are listening to it, like if they're listening to audio of fluent speakers, they often don't understand what they're listening to. If it's transcribed and they're reading along, sometimes they'll understand, but what the presentation is about is trying to structure audio so that students or learners are listening to the language a lot per day, and they understand what they're listening to, and that it's repetitive enough that they get familiar with the language that they're listening to. So it's a really simple idea underlying it. But what I've found over the years is that there's all kinds of ways that you can structure audio. So we'll go through a few of them and kind of try to go through a few examples. But if you have any questions about it, just raise your hand, because if you have a question as we go along, there's probably other people that have the exact same question. So yeah. So with language learning, anytime you're exposed to any type of language or anything you're trying to learn, you're going to forget some of it. Very few people have like a perfect memory that they can remember everything right off the bat. Almost everyone forgets words to one degree or another. But everyone can improve at memory retention, at retaining the stuff that you're learning. It's a skill that you can improve on. Memories are weakened if you don't practice them. So if you're trying to learn a phrase in a language, but you only hear it the one time, there's a good chance you're going to forget it. But the more times you practice it, obviously, the better chance you have of remembering it. Some words and phrases that you'll learn in a language will be more memorable because they're personal to you. Maybe they're funny. Maybe it's something that you're interested in. But then there's going to be lots of words that kind of get lost in the shuffle. And the more you hear them repeated, the better chance you have of learning them. And then as we go throughout the day, there's all kinds of mundane, unimportant things that we experience. And when we go to bed at night and sleep, our brain consolidates the memories that it thinks are important and then forgets the things that are unimportant. And so even if you really want to learn language in Tlingit, if you only hear it once, your brain actually might not think of it as being important. But if you keep learning it day after day through several sleep cycles, then it'll start to recognize that language is important to remember. So yes, through 3 nights of sleep cycles. So if you learn a phrase in Tlingit and then you don't practice it for the next 3 days, there's a really good chance of forgetting it. So it's like the next 3 days after learning a new phrase is like the key period of time where you want to be practicing it. And I think it's a huge problem with language education in general. We introduce learners to a new phrase and then they just never practice it the next few days, kind of move on to other stuff. But it's sort of this process of like continually teaching people new language that they forget, and then we kind of like, we're just not exposed to it enough. So if you're listening to a language, it's really helpful, maybe even essential, to understand what you're hearing, whether it's through a picture or translation, but you want to be able to understand it. And ideally, you want to have lots of opportunities to listen to it and recall it. So you're not just listening to it passively, but you're actually remembering the meaning of what you're listening to. So we're going to look at one program in particular called Glossika that really has inspired me over the years. But the whole idea behind this language learning program is just massive amounts of structured repetition. Like the guy that created this program, he wants his learners to listen to thousands and thousands and thousands of sentences that they understand every month. Yeah. And this little graph is just, if you look at the blue line, so that's how much you're forgetting. So like at the top is remembering everything, and at the bottom is forgetting everything. And then going along week by week. So if you just hear something once, you might remember most of it. But then if you never practice it, 4 weeks later, you're going to probably forget almost all of it. But then if you're forced to keep remembering it, then 4 weeks later, you're probably going to forget almost all of it. But if you structure your time so that you keep having to learn the same language week after week, the fourth or fifth or third time, or however many times, you're actually going to end up remembering most of it. It's just a matter of structuring your time. So spaced repetition audio, it's really simple. You're just listening to Tlingit repetitively on a schedule. And there's a few different ways you can go about it. You can listen to the language and repeat it out loud. So that's helpful if you're learning phrases for the first time. It can help with pronunciation, like learning how to say the sounds. It can help with vocabulary, so just teaching people new phrases. So like a common phrase that some of you have probably heard, it's good to see you. So you would just be listening to that phrase in audio and then repeating it after you hear it. It's very, very straightforward. Another way you can use spaced repetition audio is with reading and writing. So like you hear a phrase, it'll say, it's good to see you. And then you try your best without looking how it's written, just to write down what you've listened to. And if you keep doing that, you'd be surprised at how much better you can get at writing in Tlingit and really hearing all the different sounds. That was how I first improved at the language was there was 2 fluent speakers in Teslin. I didn't even know what I was doing back then. It was like back in 2017. But I would just sit with them and ask them how to say stuff, and I would just write down what they were saying. It's very repetitive, and I got really good at transcription just by doing that. And then listening and translating, which means after a person has repeated, they've listened to the phrases a lot and they've repeated it out loud, they've written it a bunch of times, you can use audio to get learners to translate so they're remembering the meaning of what they're saying. So you can do it listening to the Tlingit phrase, "Yake ursatini," and then you have to translate it out loud as you go. "It's good to see you." Or you can listen to it in English, "It's good to see you," and then you have to remember how to say it in Tlingit. So you're translating both ways. And they're both, it's important to be able to do both. But with, if you're using audio and you're learning language from these different perspectives, whether you're just repeating it, writing it, or translating it, listening to audio in slightly different ways will help people really deeply retain what they're hearing. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to look at some examples coming up here, but so this language learning program, I'm pretty skeptical of lots of programs that are out there, but as far as I can tell, this is one of the really good ones. You can look them up online. They've got a bunch of material for a bunch of different languages. And they do have some materials for some indigenous languages that are pretty endangered too. But mostly it's like more common languages like French and Spanish and Mandarin. And but anyway, the basic idea behind their language learning program is they want their learners to listen to massive amounts of comprehensible input, which means understanding what you're listening to. So ideally, they want about 10,000 sentence repetitions over the course of a month, which would be about 300 to 400 sentences of audio every day, which can range from anywhere to like half an hour per day to like 2 hours per day, somewhere in there. So it depends how much time you want to invest or how much time you can invest. But the idea is they want their learners to be listening to audio pretty much every day and a lot. Like doing 2 hours of audio work is, it's a big commitment, but it makes a huge difference. So with Glossika, they always translate their sentences. Some language learning programs stay away from translating. They use pictures to convey meaning, which is fine, but Glossika uses translation. And they always use full sentences. With my learners, I'm going to be doing a lot of this in the term coming up, the semester coming up. But we're going to be working with like singular words because they're just starting out. But Glossika always uses full sentences because then you get not just learning a single word, but how to kind of more express emotion over a full sentence. And they're trying to get their learners through this program to learn grammar rules, but not they never explain grammar explicitly. It's just by getting familiar with the sentences, they want their learners to kind of acquire grammar unconsciously. I do think there's a explicit grammar instruction is important with Tlingit, but with Glossika, they kind of stay away from that. And with the program, I wish they used to publish these books and then just send you MP3 files, like sound files. I wish they still did, but now it's all online. But yeah. And so with Glossika, the way they do their programming was you could do it one of two ways. The one way is where you spend 20 minutes to half an hour every day listening to audio. So that would be for people that have like way less time to commit to language learning. But 20 minutes, you can do that if you're like walking your dog or like driving to work in the morning or whatever. And then the other way, which we'll look at in a minute, is more like 1 to 2 hours a day, which should be more for like full-time students. Like committing 2 hours every day to audio is a lot. If you're not a full-time student, it's hard to commit that much time, even though it's much, much more effective. So anyway, what they do with this first format, everything's kind of taken care of, and it's much simpler for the student. All you do is you get an audio file, and you just listen to it, and you just repeat what you hear. And all the sentences are structured in what's called a spaced repetition algorithm, where you're listening to the same phrases on a schedule. So it's like over the course of a month, you're going to have like 20 to 25 audio files, and you just play one every day. It's kind of laid out for you. You just listen to the sentence in English. There's going to be a space of silence, and then you're going to hear the sentence in Tlingit, and then you're going to repeat after. The sentences repeat. It sounds really mixed up as you're listening to it. And slowly, new sentences are worked in and old ones are phased out. But you end up listening to the same sentences dozens of times over the course of a week. So this is what a picture of what this book looks like. This is for learning French. This confusing page is their spaced repetition algorithm. So there's a bunch of sentences here, like the weather's nice today. That's sentence 1. I'm not rich. Some of the sentences are pretty funny. So this book has 1,000 sentences in it. So this is their algorithm. So all it is, on the first day, you listen to sentences 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So every time you're kind of introducing one, and you end up, the order, it's sort of in order, but then it gets increasingly mixed up, so you can't predict what's going to happen next. And every single day you end up introducing 10 new sentences. And then I think it's 4 or 5 days in, the first sentences are phased out. So after a week of doing this, you've been introduced to 70 sentences. So just to give an idea of what it sounds like. So here's 10 sentences in Tlingit. They're all from the same verb to exist. So sometimes it's useful to look at it, like look at the writing as you're listening to audio, but sometimes it's nice to actually just not look at it and just listen to it. So we'll just listen to the audio for about a minute, and then I'll go back to this page and you can kind of read along as we go. So this is what the spaced repetition sort of sounds like.
It exists. Kudziti.
And then after you hear the Tlingit, just repeat it. So when it says kudziti, then you say kudziti.
It doesn't exist. Tlilkusti. It existed. Kumziti. It didn't exist. Shkooye. It will exist. Shkooye. It doesn't exist. Shkooye.
So you notice how it went one to five, and now it's starting over at two. So it's as you continue to listen to it, the order will get mixed up, and eventually, if you're listening to it without reading it, you won't be able to predict what's going to happen next.
It existed. Qumziti. It didn't exist. Shkooye. It will exist. Shkooye. It will not exist. Shkooye. It existed. Qumziti. It didn't exist. Shkooye.
Anyway, so that's the idea. You just listen and repeat. And you'd be surprised, especially sometimes it's helpful to read along, but if you don't look at the writing and you just try and remember, you'd be surprised after a week. You can begin to you hear the English translation and you'll be able to remember, it will exist. Like you'll be able to predict it. Okay. So you could listen to these phrases like this dozens or hundreds of times over the course of a week or two. It'd help with pronunciation, like with difficult consonants like and shifts in vowel length and tone, like E and T, how it changes to T. That's a very regular grammar thing that learners have to get used to. How the Z changes to an S, T. These are very regular grammar things that you can explain explicitly, but by doing audio like this, a learner just gets familiar saying it, and then you can explain it after. And also it just helps with vocabulary acquisition and retention. So that's the one way that this program does it. And then the other way, if you're doing it an hour or two every day, instead of just listening and repeating, you listen to the audio in a few different ways. You listen and repeat, and then you listen and transcribe the sentences, and then you record yourself speaking the sentences after a few days of practicing. And then you listen to the sentences and you have to translate them, which means you're practicing remembering the meaning. So this takes an hour or two every day, and you end up working on the same sentences from different perspectives. And it's a very effective way to spend your time if you're language learning. This won't make you fluent on its own, but you could use it to supplement other classwork. And this semester, I'm going to be trying to get my students to work up to be doing 2 hours of audio work every day. It'll be like 4 sessions of half an hour each, and we'll just see how it goes. But so yeah, we might practice a few of these examples later. We'll see how much time we have, but the idea would be first you hear the English translation, fireweed, and then you're going to hear the clinket and you repeat after it twice. So I'll just play one example here.
Fireweed. Sloosh.
Sloosh.
Sleuth.
Just like that. And then you can, this would be for transcription. So you get a different audio file. It's basically the same thing. And without looking at how it's written, you just try and remember how to spell it.
Fireweed. Sleuth. Fireweed.
You just pause it and just try your best to write down what you hear. And then the third way you can do it is to translate it from English to Tlingit or Tlingit to English.
Fireweed.
So it's easy when you're only doing this one, but if you've got 50 sentences to remember, it ends up really working your memory. But it's really effective. Then
Sleuth.
So that's, and then you'd say fireweed. You have to remember what it means. This audio program has a little schedule, so you're keeping track of the sentences that you're listening to. So the idea is so week 1, on the first day, all you're doing is listening and repeating 50 sentences. Day 2, you're listening and repeating to the next 50 sentences. And then you're transcribing the ones you worked on yesterday. And then day 3, you listen to another 50 sentences and repeat. You transcribe the ones you worked on the day before, and then you record yourself saying the sentences you worked on day 1. And then day 4, you're listening to another 50, so this is 200 sentences you've worked on. You're transcribing the ones you listened to the day before. You record yourself saying the ones from the day before, and then you're transcribing the sentences you listened to on day 1. So over the course of a work week, you're going to end up working on 250 sentences and listening to them in a bunch of different ways. Once you get into a rhythm, it's actually not that hard to do, but it is a big commitment because it takes like an hour or 2 every day. But it's very effective. It's very effective. So in 1 week, it's like you're listening to 250 sentences, and by 2 weeks, you've listened to 500 sentences. This is how they structure it, but you could do it however many you wanted to. So with learners, you could use spaced repetition audio to help with pronunciation. So probably if I was working with a learner that never heard Tlingit before, the first sound I would want to teach them would probably be the Tlingit L. And so with pronunciation, I like to show them pictures of what your tongue looks like when you're doing an English L and then the Tlingit L, because your tongue goes up towards the roof of your mouth. So you want to explain to people carefully how to make the sound and practice it with them in person. But then I would, after we've worked on it in person, I would give them audio to listen to. So here's 3 examples of words in Tlingit that have the Tlingit L in them. Tlingit, Gunneth Cheesh, Sleuth. So it's super simple, but this is an example of pronouncing Tlingit, the word Tlingit, 100 times.
Tlingit.
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 Tlingit. So all it does is repeat that one word 100 times, which takes up 6 minutes and 24 seconds. And then Gunneth Cheesh, same thing. So this is Gunneth Cheesh 100 times.
Gunneth Cheesh.
Gunneth Cheesh.
Gunneth Cheesh.
Gunneth Cheesh. And then here's Sleuth. 100 times.
Sluice. Sluice.
So, and that takes 7 minutes to listen to sluice 100 times. And it might seem kind of ridiculous in a way because it's so repetitive. But like, if you really want someone to learn these sounds, the biggest reason people struggle to learn this is they just don't hear it enough and they don't get opportunities to practice it. But if you were to, working with a learner, get them to listen to repeat to these 3 audio files like once per day, that would take them 19 minutes and 39 seconds. So like 20 minutes to listen to those 3 audio files. So in Tlingit, you hear that L sound once. Gunathchish, you hear that L sound once. And in Tluth, you hear it twice at the beginning and the end of the word. So that would be, if you listen to those 3 audio files, that would be 400 repetitions of that L sound in one day. But then if you were to do that every single day for 2 weeks, that would mean 5,600 repetitions of that L sound, which sounds like a lot, and it is, but like in 2 weeks, 20 minutes a day, you could have your learner practice that sound like literally thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of times. And after doing it for 2 weeks, they would be totally confident pronouncing it just because they've had thousands of opportunities to listen to it. So if there's any sounds in Tlingit that you yourself aren't confident in pronouncing, like this is just with the Tlingit L, but you could do it for any sound. So eventually what I want to do is create like a pronunciation course for Tlingit where it just has a bunch of these audio files that people could listen to. Okay, so that's for pronunciation. With transcription, so transcription is writing what you hear. It's super simple. You just listen to the word out loud and then write down what you hear. This is the main way that I progressed when I was starting out in Tlingit. I would just sit down with Sam Johnston or Bessie Cooley and ask them how to say something. And then they would say it, and I'd try my best to write it down. And they very patiently would just say it over and over and over again. But you don't necessarily, like it's better to work with a fluent speaker in every way. But if you don't have a fluent speaker to work with all the time, because there's not that many of them for Tlingit, audio can help with that same process. So like, it exists. Kudziti. If you just listen to that and then try your best to write it down, if you do that for like a week, you'd be surprised at how much better you get it. Not so much spelling, but like recognizing the sounds. So maybe, I don't know how much time we have. We might practice this at the end a little bit if people want, but it's a very useful thing for students just to practice transcription. And you're not doing it in like a nitpicky, like you made a spelling mistake kind of way. It's just like listening to the sounds, and because there's quite a few sounds in Tlingit that are not found in English, and it takes a while to like listen to them to like get a feel for it. So okay. And then spaced repetition for grammar, like once a learner has phrases that they've listened and repeated a whole bunch of times, so they can pronounce it, they can write it down, and they can translate it. At that point, I don't really like getting too in depth with grammar, but then after a person has really familiarized themselves with a sentence, then I think it's helpful to sometimes break a sentence down. Tlingit the grammar is incredibly rich, and it's typical in a sentence for there to be a lot more meaning in a Tlingit sentence than can be conveyed in a simple translation. And so like yak e satini, it's good to see you. But every one of the sounds actually means something. And it, like, we don't have time to like explain what all those terms mean, but over time, there's just such incredible richness to the language. Yeah.
So above you is a good example. Yake ikwasatini, yake ikwasatini.
Yeah.
And so the only difference is how many people you are speaking to.
Yeah.
And it's just in one little part of that verb.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah, she's looking at this sign up here. So the only difference is the eh to the ye. So that's the two pronouns for singular and plural.
Yeah.
And like so much of the richness of the language comes when you can not just understand like a basic translation, but like understand what the underlying parts mean. So, but it's often helpful for people to be really confident with a sentence before you start explaining the grammar. Because if it's the first time they've ever heard it and you start saying like, this is the classifier, this is the verb root, sometimes it can be a little overwhelming. But what else do we have here? Spaced repetition with oratory. So there's all kinds of audio out there of fluent speakers. So you can, so far we've been looking at isolated sentences and isolated words. But if you want, you can use this same stuff and use it to help you listen to audio of fluent speakers. So there's an incredible, whoopsie, sorry. I don't even know what I just did. Oh, I just moved it. Okay, so there's an amazing book. Some of you may have seen it before. So this book is from a Tlingit elder. Her name was Elizabeth Nyman Sadia. And she goes through some stories and she goes through some stories and genealogy and stuff, and it was recorded and transcribed by Jeff Lear. And so I have the audio of it, so I'll just listen to a couple seconds of it here. This is it.
I'd like you to tell that story one more time about the fight between what's I say and Shkooye.
Shkooye, which key away is has the teen you Yado Shkooye says, Yado away, what's I say? What would Shkooye has probably at. You were good. Then which in a statin. So what says it cover up to
So this elder was from Atlin in the interior. She is like just a master speaker. Like this book is it's probably like the greatest book of any one speaker, arguably. But anyway, so that's listening to the audio, just the way that they recorded it. But if you want, you can, once you have the audio, I use this program called Adobe Audition. You have to pay for it, but it's well worth it. But you could also download a program called Audacity for free, which you can basically do the same thing. But if you want, you can copy and paste spaces of silence into that audio, and then you can repeat after as you're listening to a speaker. So much more helpful for learners sometimes if they have a little space of silence that they can repeat what the speaker is saying. So yeah, I'll try my best to repeat after her, but this is the sort of thing you could use it for.
Shkooye, which key kaawat is hastatin you ya to washkuda Sitka. Ya to we what's up there?
So like, you know, if you were, this speaker is from Atlin, but if you're listening to audio of a speaker from whatever community you're from, you could do this sort of thing to like get used to the dialect from your community, for example. It's just like all I did to make that audio, by the way, all I do is select a little space of silence, copy, paste. Like it's, once you get used to it, it's very easy to make this sort of thing. So you could use spaced repetition audio to listen to fluent speakers. Here's another example of it. So this is Sam Johnston. He's a fluent speaker from Teslin. A few years ago, he taught me this prayer. I really like it. It's you could use it after you harvest a plant or you go hunting or fishing, and it's a prayer of thanks to the animal. So this is Sam saying this prayer. I took this video on my iPhone years ago.
Kuna chish de sego haji de ti akak yakogachtu sti kaya idachstaka hariti kuna chish.
I really like this prayer. It's very beautiful and it's really short too. I've said it many times over the past few years. Sam speaks really quickly. So with a bunch of people I've worked with over the past few years, we've worked on this audio. But you can, if you want to teach your students something like a prayer, let me see here. So this is the same audio, just with spaces of silence, copy pasted in there.
Kuna chish de sego haji de ti
Gonna chish is the segu had
akak yakogachtu sti
a cog ye kuka to
kaya idachstaka hariti
ega ideshtuka had.
kuna chish.
It just gives you a space of silence to repeat after. He speaks really quickly, so you got to put a big space of silence compared to, but anyway, so like whatever language you want your students to work with, or if it's just for yourself too, the technology to make this sort of stuff is very, very simple. Like once you kind of learn how to use a program like this, mostly it's just like copy and pasting. It's like pretty straightforward. I'm not like great with computers, but learning how to do this was not very hard for me. Anyway, so these are like different ways you could structure the audio programs. So like with spaced repetition audio, this is like the conclusion slide. So there are endless ways you could structure it. Kind of like the more the better, the more repetitions the better. So like spaced out across more days, the more your students or you will retain the language that you're listening to. Over time, you kind of need less, but in the beginning, I think more repetitions. The reason students forget language is because they just don't hear it enough. So the more repetition, the better. whoever you're working with, you'll get a sense of how many repetitions it takes over how much time. But what you want is for people to like deeply acquire language so that they never forget it. It's like part of your tongue's muscle memory, long-term memory. You're not going to forget it in 2 weeks. It's like you can structure it to help with pronunciation, understanding language, writing skills, and even like analyzing grammar and like the deeper meaning. As a teacher, it's really easy to create. All you have to do is get comfortable like working with audio files, and then this program I use is called Adobe Audition. It's like what's that program? Adobe Acrobat Reader. It's like for PDFs. It's the most common program for reading. Well, the same company makes this audio program, and it's like I really love it. I've been using it for a few years, and it's very it's just very professional and easy to use. But Audacity is fine too. I haven't used Audacity for like a few years now, and I kind of like forget. But I remember it like 5 years ago. I remember it being fine, and it's for free. And you could use this whole presentation, like spaced repetition audio. It's not good enough on its own. Like I think either befriending a fluent speaker or like being involved in language classrooms is the most important thing for language learning. But then you could use this sort of thing to supplement pretty much any class, like whatever language you're trying to learn. You could create audio that you're listening to, whether you want it to be for like 10 minutes a day or like 2 hours a day. Yeah. Okay, so it's a little after 11. So we got like 10 minutes or so. So I don't know if there's any questions. We could, if you guys want, we could practice some of it, but, or I could answer any questions.
So was that Lossica that you showed it, is that actually available in Korean?
No, yeah, I wish it was. So this book is in French. It's not available in Tlingit. Years ago, I emailed them, and they were actually open to doing it, but it was a lot of work because they have specific sentences that they use, and a lot of them, some of them were fine, and then some of them, Tlingit culture is so different than English and French that it was very clunky translating them. But I'm hoping to like create a bunch of this stuff both for like beginners pronunciation, and then like some other material like from the beginning Tlingit workbook that Lance Twitchell published, and put it up there. And if I have like a name and email sheet, and I'm gonna put audio files on a Google Drive. So if you want, I could just email the Google Drive.
So I'm familiar with the Children of the Taku storybook, and they work this way, where the vocabulary is presented a word at a time with pictures, and then there are sentences. They actually, there's like 30 sentences in a story, and the first time you hear it, you hear only 10 sentences. So you hear the big part of the story, and then the next time they add more sentences.
Right.
But I haven't done enough repetition of it, so thank you.
Yeah.
But it's very similar to this in presenting it, and there's audio for it.
Did you guys want to?
Where did you find the audio for the Elizabeth man? Was that me? Where did you find that? Could you see it?
Yeah. Let me see here. It's a Google Drive. Okay, the link. It's a Google Drive. I can.
Is it a Google Drive that's accessible to everyone?
I think so. I'll just have to ask Lance. He sent it to me.
Yeah, Dusty was trying to connect with the YNLC, and she's Sadie's granddaughter. And they were like, well, maybe, we'll see. So I'm really curious about this, how you got the
Yeah,
audio.
I don't know. Like I was working on it like, I don't know, 2 months ago, and I just asked Lance, just like, is there like audio of this book? And he was like, oh yeah, and he just like texted it to me. So like, you guys, I'll just send it to you. Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah. Okay, we'll talk about it later. 'Cause,
Yeah,
like,
I also have a question that might be beneficial for the both of you. Just curious about if you've gone through the work of creating, I just know I'm definitely not a technologically inclined human, and so if there's something that you've done, especially, for this group, and I would be interested in Auntie Mrs. Nyman's book and doing this sort of thing. Have you done any of the work, so we just like piggyback off you and steal that from you a little bit?
Yeah. Yeah, we could definitely do that. Like I haven't done a lot with hers, with that audio file, but I've more done it with Sam's stuff just because I work with him a lot more. But then it occurred to me like a month or two ago, like why don't we just do this with like audio files from like a long time ago? So yeah. So I was thinking of doing that with Sadia's work, and just like, because I haven't actually listened to her very much, and I've read that book a fair amount, but I've never actually listened to it. But yeah, that, for sure. Okay.
Yeah, it's in Jeff Lear's orthography, and so it's for us like it's just been a struggle. We use the down orthography, so for me reading through it, it's just been a real struggle to try to like. It's a gap for me. Like it's not a connection point.
Totally.
But one last question: have you tried to export those files in the program that you're using that costs money into Audacity that's free, which is the program that we still use?
Yeah. It just uses MP3 or WAV files, so like any standards, like Audacity could open these.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, like Audacity and Adobe are essentially the same basic thing. Like they have slightly different controls and buttons in it. Like once you get used to one, it's annoying shifting back and forth. But they basically do the exact same thing.
So the beautiful prayer that you shared, is that available to get like the audio and translation?
It's on the wall.
Yeah, it's on the wall. So like, I'll just pass around this this piece of paper, and what I can do is I can put this presentation and then like any of the audio files with it, and the prayer, and I can just put it on there. And what I'm going to be doing this semester is, so like there was one slide here for pronouncing the Tlingit L, but I want to do it for all of the sounds. So like within 2 or 3 months, it'll be like for all of the sounds. So I'll probably just put it on a Google Drive and email it. So that'd probably be the best way to share it, but I'll just pass this around, I guess.
You're going to be trying to raise it. When they're allowed just to put this on right on.
Sorry, did someone else have a question?
I was just gonna ask him, what was the name of Nyman's book again?
Legends of the Fall.
The legacy of a Taku.
Is that it?
Yeah.
The Legacy.
Yeah, you can download the PDF of this book for free.
Yes.
It might be out of print. I don't know. You might be able to get hard copies of it still. Yeah, it's this book is like a true masterpiece, and Oh, sorry.
I thought that some of your very simple summary of the repetitive schedule would be useful for some of us learners to try and get ourselves into the practice of going through those 4 different ways of learning something.
Right.
So I don't know if are you going to maybe, you're getting an email list, maybe you can send some of this stuff out? Because I think this is very useful.
Yeah. It just takes a bit
I
of
don't want that. I want the 4 steps.
the 4.
I have like 4 different steps.
The words about
Listen.
repeating.
Yeah, that kind of, that one. That one. 4 steps.
There was another one.
It wasn't a bunch of numbers.
4 steps. Which slide?
This
Oh,
Yeah.
maybe this one. Yeah. Like the idea. This is just the way Glossika does it. Or I'm sure there's different ways you could do it, but yeah, it would just take. You just have to have it like laid out with instructions and get into a rhythm of like listening to the examples, and then. But yeah, like I think it's useful to be doing like listening and repeating, transcription, and then translation, like all of them every day. The recording yourself is an interesting one. I've done it with students, and I think it's a useful thing for people. Sometimes they get pretty shy, but like, but yeah, I think it's useful. I think it's useful for learners too.
Sheesh.
Yeah.